That over there is water, a watery area known as a pond. A pond is a body of water, smaller than a lake, but bigger than a puddle of dog piss. If it wasn't for water, we would die within 3 to 4 days, which is quite a sobering thought.
I'm Marcus Welsh, and I use books, articles, websites and your emails to investigate, discuss and go on adventures. Hi everyone. Unfortunately I was fired from Jackanory, but I'm back with my own show. The year is 1974 and I have a new friend. Say hi.
Hi.
What you got there?
Water.
Nice. Is that what today's show's about? It is.
Yes.
So today's show is about water, and I'm going to start off by reading you some fun water-based facts. The amount of water on Earth now is exactly the same as it was when the Earth began. That means you could be drinking from the same puddle, or glass more likely, that the dinosaurs from Jurassic Park, you know, the small cute ones were drinking from.
That's not a thing yet.
Did you know that humans are 60% water? A jellyfish is 95% water and so is a cucumber. Makes you think, doesn't it? If a cucumber is 95% water, what's the other 5%?
I don't know, green?
Yeah, it could be. Also, isn't it weird that ice floats in water?
That's because it gets heavier, right?
No, it would sink if it was heavier, wouldn't it? Well, actually, it's due to the charge and the bond of the atoms.
Are you reading from your phone down there?
Shh. Put simply, when cooling, hydrogen keeps the oxygen apart, forming a sparser lattice structure. Once it's ice, it's less dense than the liquid state. Yeah, actually, only 0.007% of the water on Earth is available for its 6.8-ish billion people that live on it.
Sounds like a real problem there, hun.
Yeah. Scary, actually, if you think about it, because by 2025, half the population of the world will live in areas of high water stress. And you know something? With the greed of corporations and other countries making movements to control water supply around their borders,
before we know it, water will not be a luxury, one that flows from our taps into a bubble bath. It will be something we have to hunt for, Mad Max style. We remember these glorious days as we rinse a sock of its rainwater into our mouths, barely conscious, lips cracked and bleeding. The last nutrient expels itself out of our body. A wild vulture splits the abdomen open with its beak and sucks out the last morsels of piss fumes from our bladder.
But more about that later. See you next time. Wave.
I can't wave. The very first people to settle did so near water for many reasons, including food, drinking water, sanitation, and eventually trade. Examples are the Indus Valley Civilization, Mesopotamia, and ancient Egypt. Egypt, in fact, is known as the Nile's gift to the world. The Nile would control life. The year was even divided into periods around the fertilization of the land and crops around the river.
Seems cultures around the world were coming up with innovation around the same time as each other. Sanskrit and Greek writing from around 4000 BCE-ish have found recommendations to boil water to make it safe to drink. They also added small amounts of silver and copper to prevent pathogen growth, the same kind of system that is used by our modern day home water filters.
Ancient philosopher Thales, who hailed from the Miletus region of modern-day West Turkey, proposed that water, or hydor, was a permanent substance. Ancient philosophy was interested in the arche, which means the primary element, and from Thales' point of view, the river is the source of all mortal and immortal life. On this basis, he states, the earth floats on water like a raft. As civilization started to grow, people would settle further and further away from the water source. Erbil, Troy, Athens all dug sloping horizontal tunnels to divert water miles away into their cities. In fact, even in ancient times in the Indus Valley and Mesopotamia, they created elaborate drainage systems of gutters and channels to direct water that had gathered in streets away to waterways. They used cisterns to capture clean water from roofs of buildings for fresh drinking water. Now it gets good because the Romans are here. The Romans developed a complex and complete system of pipes and aqueducts to collect water, distribute it to homes, and then divert the used water, known as wastewater, back into the environment. Prior to Rome, the bigger cities rarely had more than 100,000 people, but by 300 BCE, the population of Rome had grown to 500,000. And they loved water. They were always hanging around in baths and posing next to their fancy fountains. Over the next 500 years, the Romans built huge systems, incredible bridges, arcades, viaducts, and aqua claudia. Incredibly, their aqueducts moved water through gravity alone, being constructed along a slight downward angle within channels of stone, brick, or concrete. The Romans also invented a sewer system, and invented the first public toilets and urinals. In fact, urine was a commodity, sold to fabric shops and laundries because of its ammonia content. Where does our drinking water come from? Surface water and groundwater. Fresh water makes up less than 3% of the water on the planet, and not all of that is accessible. This graphic shows how little water we actually have to play with, and drink and brush our teeth with. The process to get from ground to tap is the following. We sample water from the source. It gets analysed for water quality parameters. We know which ones cause disease and which ones are simply for aesthetics, i.e. the colour. So think of it like a nice orange carrot, perfect for the supermarket shelves. You don't want a cloudy looking rat piss coming out from your tap. A relevant treatment process is assigned, which aims to kill parasites and harmful bacteria. The water is monitored closely throughout the process to ensure the product is safe and tastes good. Minerals are added, for example fluorine in some cases, and chlorine is added to disinfect.
So with that in mind, how come water always seems to taste different? And what is the optimal water for both taste and health? First place to start is with groundwater. Groundwater is always perceived to taste worse because it has compounds like iron and manganese in. Other things that affect taste are pH levels, residual chlorine, sulfates, and those little baby worms, the tiny little worms with varying degrees of deliciousness. This study from Plantikhanov et al. Found that the preferred bottled and tap water samples were associated with moderate contents of dissolved solids and with relatively high concentrations of bicarbonate, sulfate, calcium and magnesium. At the other end of the scale, the worst tasting water was associated with higher levels of sodium, potassium and chlorine. Interestingly enough, residual chlorine didn't affect the taste ratings, but it allowed the taste testers to distinguish between bottled and tap water. So that's what I'm going to do now.
Quick note, I recorded this very early in the morning and the absolute state of my taste test. So I'm going to commentate over what I'm doing here because I'm talking rubbish. So here's what I did. I got 3 glasses of water for some reason I didn't even take a picture of, and that was all muddled up by my lovely assistant. The 3 types of water were the expensive shop-brought water, the cheapest shop-brought water, and tap water.
That tastes like compounds. That tastes like more luxurious compounds. And that's tap water. So the one I said was the most luxurious compounds was actually the tap water. The one I said was the tap water was the cheap own brand. And the one that I said tasted a bit like compounds but was cheap was the luxurious Fiji flower water. So it doesn't really surprise me that I've got that wrong because generally most bottled water is just repackaged tap water. Bottled water is just not regulated the same way tap water is. Therefore it's not necessarily healthier to drink. One study from EcoWatch found that bottled water is 64% tap water and it costs 2,000 times more, plus plastic.
And what does this mean in terms of health? Really, there's not too much difference. What you can do is find your area's water regulator and check their data. Always check the back of the label for your bottled water for, I don't know, say lead. Really, just go for it, unless you're drinking ice cold or worse, fizzy water. Back to Hull again for some reason, a common theme in my videos now. Hull is about 18 miles from the North Sea, and the city obtained their water supply from rivers and creeks during the 14th and 15th century. These water sources dried up in the summer months, to the point where the population would leave the city over the summer.
The water was full of shit and made people sick in this period, and that's because it wasn't treated. So people drank alcohol instead. The average person in Bavaria would drink 1 litre of beer per day.
People used to use their poo as fertiliser in their gardens, but as cities grew, fewer people had gardens, so resorted to dumping their poo in the streets. I think we all remember Garde-Lou from Tudor lessons at school, but if not, it was the cry someone would shout before lobbing their bucket of poo out the window.
As the cities grew, they would build fountains for public use. However, human and animal poo would still collect there. Dung collector was an actual job. People would go around the streets at night picking up the poo and then selling it on for fertiliser.
Between 1347 and 1352, 30% of Europe's population died due to the plague. Searching for an answer to why, people obviously came to the most sensible conclusions and blamed witches and foreign people. Some things will never change.
It wasn't until the 1850s when a cholera outbreak proved water to be the source of disease transmission, but more about that later.
Water, one day, is going to be a commodity. The issue is we do not value water, and that's despite the fact it is the most priceless entity on Earth. Without it, we die. I spoke about how little water we have access to earlier. Here's that graphic again as a reminder. And now think that most of that is used for agriculture. Let's look at an almond.
I found multiple sources online for the amount of water it takes to grow an almond, but the lowest estimate I found is 1.1 litre per almond. So, let's see how many almonds are in a pound.
So here I am, not quite knowing what a pound is. I'm measuring out 2 ounces in the end. I keep failing with the scales. By that point I gave up and measured it out later on. I found there were 25 almonds to an ounce. So 25 almonds times 16 ounces equals 400 almonds per pound.
The United States are the biggest exporter of almonds, and in 1 year they exported 1.4 billion pounds of the almonds. That means in that year the amount of water required to grow that amount, that 1.4 billion, according to my estimates, is this. And that's a lot of water.
And almonds aren't even top of the list. This graph shows the gallons of water per pound required to grow each crop. There's our almonds, which seems a lot, but then you get to meat. We all know this, it's not news, but for 1 pound of meat, somewhere between 2,000 and 5,000 gallons of water is used. So with all these people on Earth to feed, and with population growing, not decreasing, we need access to more water, right? Well, good news. Due to climate change, the areas where drinking water exists, freshwater lakes, glaciers, etc., are all losing water rapidly. And the groundwater we extract from has collected over thousands and thousands of years. If we use it all up, it won't refill in any lifetime. And today, between 1 and 2 billion people lack safe drinking water. More people die from drinking unsafe water than war.
We all know how the world is going to, full of greed and corruption. As the water resource depletes, companies like Nestle will be bottling up products at source and selling them on for a profit. It's a real-life dystopian Peckham Spring. Since I've been doing this research, here's a list of Nestle products I will now be boycotting for sure. Me and my son.
Also expect the wars of the future to be over water, just like the oil wars before. Here's a map that shows the zones most at risk for water-based political interaction.
It's all inevitable, so what do we do about it? Cape Town was running out of water fast. A dry climate, a high, dense population, led to the city declaring it was going to shut off its water supply. People would have to ration their water that they accessed through taps located across the city, and that shut-off date was known as Day Zero, but they never got there. In the end, people changed their habits.
This graph shows the predicted water storage in the city's dams against what actually happened because people put in place their own measures. Now, granted it rained, but people got together and came up with solutions. They showered for less than 2 minutes. They let the yellow mellow. Swimming pools, fountains, car washing was all banned, and importantly, agricultural water quotas were put in place.
And these are actually all things we can do now.
Leonardo da Vinci proposed an ideal city to France's King Francois I in 1517. The key aspect was removing wastes from city streets to avoid disease. The solution was to create the city on various levels. A lower level designed for trade and transport, and an upper level, which was an open and well-ventilated space to be used and enjoyed by citizens and pedestrians going about their day. The lower level would have wide streets and channels. He even designed hydraulic plants to create artificial channels throughout the city. This lower level would be used by carriages, pack animals and boats, which would allow the transportation of goods. This city plan was never realised, but it was way ahead of its time. As the population of London grew rapidly over time, the water demand grew. Initially, Londoners were drinking water from springs outside the city, but with more mouths to feed and more bodies to bathe, costs were increasing rapidly. Companies were founded to pump water from the Thames itself.
However, and by this point we're in the early 19th century, there were regulations put in place for people not to fling their poo and whatever all over the shop. However, they weren't really heeded, and for that reason the Thames ended up a little bit shitey.
And it got worse. As the rich were building their water closets, where we get WC from, and plugging them into the sewage system, more poo flooded the Thames drinking water.
And that's only going to lead to one thing: cholera.
By this point, people were still blaming miasma. Basically, that means that bad disease such as plaguey plague and cholera were caused by noxious bad air vapours.
A man named John Snow, not that one, that one, in 1854, during the Broad Street cholera outbreak, made the connection between contaminated water sources and disease. He managed to abate the cholera outbreak in Broad Street by removing the pump handle. Simple as that. He also did some research and found that people drinking from water sources further upstream, the less shitey areas, were less likely to be ill. Here is the Broad Street pump, kept there as a monument to him. And I would have gone if it wasn't for COVID times, but you know.
Similar situations of disease outbreak were occurring across the globe, so people realised it was time to sort this manky water out. Water treatment plants, sand filtration, and chlorine disinfection were all key to eliminating waterborne diseases. From 1900 to 1947, the lifespan of an average American increased from 47 to 63.
But as I said, we need more water, and immediately. Utilities already struggled to keep up with costs. And always consider that as humans we become ever more stupid, so therefore water plants are having to deal with emerging contaminants. These are substances that are being newly found in our environment, like pharmaceuticals and personal care products. There's also a set of really persistent contaminants called PFAS, which is found in everything these days, from textiles to electronics to cosmetics. So what does the future of water sustainability look like?
Reduce, reuse and recycle. Reduce. We need to push for water conservation, such as installing low-flow plumbing fixtures and not having 3 baths per day like I do. I don't do that. Reuse and recycle, treating wastewater with highly specialised technology to make it pure enough to use again for a specific application. Instead of wasting clean water on certain things, we can treat wastewater to a certain extent and just use that. Examples of reclaimed water use are cooling power plants, boilers, refineries, paper mills, landscape irrigation, golf course irrigation, golf is a huge water waster, and toilet flushing. When used for landscaping, it actually needs no further treatment because plants grow better with the nutrients and organic matter in the wastewater. Just don't accidentally drink it.
But there's lots of sea out there. Wouldn't it be lovely if we could just drink it? Desalination is the process of removing the salt from the water.
But salt isn't just crystals within the water. It dissolves so it becomes part of the water. There's a couple of ways of going about desalination, but this is put very simply. You can heat it up and then let it rain, like evaporation works in nature, and reverse osmosis, which is essentially pushing seawater across a membrane that is incredibly fine until the salts separate from the water. The problem with both are the massive amounts of energy required.
The good news, however, is it's much easier to use reverse osmosis to treat wastewater. That's because within that wastewater there's less than 1% of salt. So that's a much easier task than trying to desalinate salty seawater. And that's water, really, in summary. I hope you're all a little bit thirsty. Going to look into the big water wasters so we can boycott them and take in shorter showers. It's important to remember the finite nature of resource on Earth. Just as people say, live every day like it's your last, we should be treating water like one day it could be rationed, because soon enough, and sooner than you think, it will be. Yeah. Oh, horrible, disgusting shit.
Thank you for watching. Don't forget to rewind the tape before you take it back.